Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News. So good to be back with you. Lovely to see you. Lovely to be back to have a bit of a chat about the news of the day as we do it here at 10 o'clock weeknights. If you were with us at the end of last night's show, you would have heard me talking about David Fenton. David Fenton is an activist and a pioneer in progressive communications. David Fenton has just released a book called The Activist's Media Handbook, Lessons from 50 Years as a Progressive Agitator. And David Fenton, well, he's sort of joining us tonight. I did a podcast with him today, which is going to be released first thing tomorrow morning. So if you're in a major metropolitan area and it takes you an hour to get to work from 8 till 9, then you'll be able to tune in and either listen to it on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, watch it on YouTube. I don't know about you, but I use YouTube as an audio device quite a lot. So quite a lot, I'll play a podcast. I've got, I'm one of those suckers who chooses to pay for YouTube Premiere. It's $15 a month or something, and you get no adverts. And it also means that I know that there is ways of jerry-rigging it, but it means when your screen is locked on your phone, YouTube keeps playing. So I use YouTube Premiere, and I end up listening to a lot of audio on YouTube. So we'll be on YouTube, I think, live streaming from 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and it's on Apple Podcast and Spotify. I think it's 6 tomorrow morning. So if you're on a bus and you want to hear the conversation that I had with David Fenton today, then in full tomorrow morning you'll be able to pick it up. Just remember though, it is a part of this YouTube channel, but it's not a part of the BHN. It's another product we do called the Department of Conversation. So if you are going to be, I can probably show you the branding there, that if you are going to be looking for us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, don't look up BHN, look up the Department of Conversation with Pat Britton, and that's where you'll find it. Now, the reason I went into that meandering conversation is we are going to be playing a couple of clips from that conversation tonight. Fascinating man, and a really interesting cat. It's actually, I don't know, I've got 3 little clips that we'll play at the second half of the show, but just sensible, fascinating, and somewhat, I mean, he's done everything with everyone over the last 50 years, including being the progressive organizer of various concerts featuring, Bruce Springsteen and Yoko Ono and John Lennon and, all of these things. And already today, and I'll show when we get to it, I put out a tweet based on his commentary, which basically says why Carl saying, thank you, Carl. That's quite a nice thing to say. Carl saying DOC was his gateway drug into BHN, including why setting identarian politics as your main focus will not give you the win. And then straight away, there's some pushback on Twitter saying that, if you don't make room for, people, then you always, it's a right-wing perspective. But the perspective that David had, and I agree with him, is that it's all good to stand by your ideologies, which is what identarian politics is. But if it's a philosophy that causes you not to get in power, and I'm using that word, I mean, some people will rally against it, but in power, then you can never be there to make a change to help those marginalized groups. So some people think it's a scorched earth policy. It's absolutely my way or no other way. Whereas it sounds like through 50 years of progressive activism, and I don't think there's too many people out there that can challenge the CV that puts out there. He's saying if we don't actually get into power, then no matter what our ideologies are, it's pointless. And the message of identitarian politics, be it gender or whatever it is, at the top of your list, he's not saying it's not important, but he's saying if it's at your top of your list, like it is for some politicians, it is not a winning formula. Really interesting conversation. It was a really interesting conversation. So tomorrow morning, I think it's live on YouTube Live, isn't it? It's playing out live at 8. And as I said, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I think I uploaded it for like 6 because I'm aware, especially I used to live in Auckland. I know sometimes it takes you an hour and a half to get to work and people jump on the bus or whatever and you can have it in your ears. So I thought I'd put it up nice and early in case people want to check it out. But really interesting tomorrow morning and some clips coming up tonight. Right. Now for tonight, me and the Ginger Bitch are here. And we are going to host you for a good portion of tonight. I think there is a chance that Chewy may show up at some stage, but right now he's drinking whiskey in a bar in town. So if he does turn up, he could make for some very interesting conversations. So there you go. Gosh, there are people already going in there. Simon says identity politics is that it's a losing pathway in left ideology. Yes, I agree. And I think the other thing, I feel like I don't want to say too much now because I don't actually want to take away from what David shares tonight in 3 short clips or tomorrow in an hour and 10 minutes, is that, the left are elitist. They are what the right claims to be. We don't like oversimplifying things. We don't like repeating ourselves. And they're the things that actually fire off the synapses in your head that get stuck and work as a messaging system. So the right does that very well, make America great again, build that wall, these sorts of things. And the left is too, in general, it's too, highfalutin, thinks their shit don't stink too much, to kind of lower themselves to these overly simplistic slogans, but it's the slogans that work. So he's fascinating. I said to him at the end of the podcast, how can I connect you with the left-wing politicians in New Zealand with his upcoming election? And he went, love to be involved. So, I don't know any of those people personally, but I might tag a few left-wing politicians and I'll chat for tomorrow morning and see what actually pans out. So we're going to get on with some stuff tonight. There's 2 or 3 little stories that I'm going to touch on. They're really actually maybe only 2-minute stories. And then we're going to have a look in more detail at the story of, where has it gone? It's not even so much more detail, but there's quite a shocking story that's come out based on another shocking story. The gay club in Colorado, the Gay Nightclub shooter, his father's spoken out, and he's made it worse, believe it or not. We're going to have a look at that as well as some other bits and bobs. We'll just get into things because there's lots of little bits and bobs to actually get into, including a conversation that I'm really surprised the media hasn't picked up on. I'm only going to touch on it really quick because it's only 1 paragraph in a press release from ACT to do with them wanting to bring back bulk funding. And if you remember the conversation I had with Pat Newman the other night, the president of the Northland Principals Association, Te Tai Tokoro, he was saying that National is being driven by ACT's ideologies when it comes to education. And now ACT is starting to put out some thoughts around education. And some people that I've heard from today in the teaching sector are quite concerned about this. But look, let's start with this one. We're going to start with a little bit of the OCR conversation from yesterday. Adrian Orr apologizes for significant economic shocks and he accepts that the Reserve Bank of New Zealand is engineering a recession. Responding to questions from MPs at the Finance and Expenditure Committee this morning, Reserve Bank of New Zealand Governor Adrian Orr, did I say Alan Orr? Adrian Orr accepted commentary that the central bank was deliberately engineering a recession to combat supercharged inflation. This is what he said. I think that is correct. We are deliberately trying to slow aggregate spending in the economy. The quicker inflation expectations come down, the less work we need to do and the less likely it is that we have a prolonged period of low negative growth. So I guess what he's saying is a short and sharp recession. I did wonder today, maybe it's my naivety when it comes to sort of being a bit of an ideologue, I wonder if the government had to come out, or the Reserve Bank had to come out and said, if you guys can't rein in your spending in this quarter, then we're going to do it in the next quarter. Like, it's probably not possible, but I did wonder if the Reserve Bank would ever kind of go, you've got one chance, citizens of New Zealand, to rein in your spending. And if you don't do it, we're going to have to put some things in place to make things hurt, to force you to stop spending. I don't know. I mean, it was just a thought. I mean, it's probably an unrealistic thought, but it was a thought. The other thing that Adrian Orr went on to say, which was an interesting thing from the Reserve Governor, the Reserve Bank Governor also offered an apology to New Zealanders for the significant economic shocks that households are facing, or admitted households were paying the price, right? So you and I are paying the price because monetary policy was too stimulating for too long. So this is Reserve Bank policy. So as I've been saying for the last few months, the Reserve Bank is responsible primarily for inflation. Monetary policy that the Reserve Bank put in place was too stimulatory for too long, meaning they did this and now we're having to pay the consequences for it. But before that, he offered an apology on behalf of the Central Bank's Monetary Policy Committee. We are sorry that New Zealanders have been buffeted by these significant economic shocks and are experiencing inflation well above our central bank 1 to 3% target range, he said. He repeated that inflation is nobody's friend and said it led to significant economic costs. I do want to reaffirm the committee's absolute commitment and confidence to getting inflation back within the target range. So they're targeting 1 to 3%. And I guess, I mean, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because if it makes a difference, if they can actually rein it back in with, 6 months of pain, and we're all better off for it afterwards, and that will be a good thing. But I guess, like I said last night, the last time the Reserve Bank started putting out various predictions and various policy changes, they got it wrong. And it's one of the things that led us to this inflation. They were projecting that the economy would have more unemployed people and that the economy would be worse than it is right now. And so they set their policies at a certain position, and they were wrong with those projections. And that's one of the main driving factors that we are where we are. So I can only hope that this time they're not wrong. Let's go to some comments that are all in. Lots of people are saying good evening. I think I've done that one. Free Soul says, I've been arguing about the hate speech changes all day with right-wingers after Kerry Allen's interview on News Hub. Lost count of how many times I got called woke, libtard, ha. I mean, you do what you want, Free Soul, and communicate how you want, but I always ask people what they mean by woke. Define it for me. Normally they can't, because it doesn't mean much to anyone, really. Or they'll basically have to acknowledge it means I don't agree with you, and so that's what they do. Conspiracy Realist has a question. I haven't pre-read the question because I'm here by myself tonight, but we'll see what it says. Do you agree that jail time in New Zealand should be extended? I feel like if you take someone's life, you deserve your life in jail. New Zealand is too soft. I think that we probably don't understand the jailing system, the justice system in that form, because there is a way, and the most serious criminals, I can't remember the term off the top of my head, but there is a term. Someone will know. You can put it in the chat, where basically they give you a sentence, and it means you are in jail until we let you out. I can't think off the top of my head what that term is, but it is in jail for the rest of your life. So I think that does happen in New Zealand. I think that because we don't communicate that very well, or there is whatever the word I'm trying to think of. Let's see if someone will get it straight idea. That does happen. Are we too soft? Well, I'm always about the best outcomes, yeah? And from what I see at the moment, what I read at the moment, when I do delve into the research, it would seem that our criminal justice system is not working. And the fact that ideally you and I and anybody watching this wants the best outcome for people who go inside prison. Because what we want, because remember, 99% of people who go inside prison will be out again at some stage. And what we want is for them to be, healthy, able to function, positive members of society again. And the system that they've got at the moment, which many, including National Party prime ministers in the past, have said is a university of crime, doesn't serve them well. So when you say it's too soft, or you feel like it might be too soft, or exactly how you phrase that, I don't know. I just think it's not working. Now, whether that means more prison time, whether that means better prison time, now by better, I don't mean more comfortable. I mean a better outcome, a better way of rehabilitation, because ultimately that's what we want. Yeah. We want people who are in prison. Well, first of all, I want people who are in prison who are those who deserve to be in prison. And I think we have a certain handle on that in New Zealand, certainly not like America. In fact, talking to David Fenton today, he was talking about one of the reasons in the late 60s he was pushing for legalized cannabis is he was working with someone who had 10 years in jail for getting caught with 3 joints. Now, someone having, low amounts of marijuana for personal use should not be anywhere near a jail cell. Now, I'm not sure of the exact system in New Zealand, but the system's not working. I'd like the system to be better. Carl says leftists don't want to be pithy, they want to be nuanced. Most people want the elevator pitch. Yeah, that's the part of the conversation we got to. Actually, it's like it's almost like leftists that are really proud. He talks about the right goes into, when they study at university, goes into things like marketing and business, and the left go into the human sciences. And in the human sciences, you're kind of rewarded for being he didn't use these words, but kind of long-winded and highfalutin. And in marketing or in business, you're rewarded for, as Carl just said, doing an elevator pitch, going bang bang. That's the idea. Do you want to buy it? And then they take that into their politics and they go bang bang, and you get it straight away. And the left use their long-winded way of saying things, and they say it in a way that's not understood. And he didn't use the word jargon, but David Fenton was saying that a lot of people using jargon on the left, then people don't understand it. And if they don't understand what you're talking about, then they will not side with you. So, for example, not that this was the focus of our conversation, but because it's going to come up tonight again, conversations around gender, identarian politics. If the recipient of your conversation doesn't understand what you're talking about, then you've lost them. And what the left does very badly is use terms and phrases that the general public don't understand, whereas the right goes build that wall. And because the left uses terms that the public don't understand, then you've lost them. Because it's a little bit like, I watch Shark Tank, yeah? And one of the things they often talk about in Shark Tank, if a product is good but it's hard work, they say you have to re-educate your audience on how to use this new mousetrap, whatever the thing is. And actually educating the audience on how to use the product makes it so much more difficult for that product to be successful. The left in politics speak in a way that they need to also then educate the audience what the fuck they're saying, whereas the right say build that wall. And actually it's detrimental. It's detrimental to the left being able to be in a position at the table to make decisions. And I think you are seeing that in New Zealand politics right now. Free Soul just responding to asking about what Ween's woke is, exactly about the woke where they have no idea. That's it. Thank you. See, I'm always, look, everyone, preventative detention. It wasn't going to come. That's the word. So if people get preventative detention, even if it's got a time frame attached to it, what that means is you're inside until we let you out. Melvin says, I look at the US sentencing and some of it does seem pretty extreme. You think? Gosh. Bunch going on, bunch more comments. Right. Next little small topic. This is really just a bit of a gloaty one. Sarah Palin just lost a 50-year GOP seat to Alaska's first native rep. For decades, it's been unthinkable that Alaska could let a Democrat occupy its only seat in the House of Representatives, which has been held by the late GOP rep Don Young since 1972. But in the background, as Americans in the lower 48 were captivated by races in Georgia, or Arizona, that's exactly what happened. Alaskans voted 55-45 in favor of Democrat Mary Peltola, I think, a former state legislator who just won her first full term over celebrity ex-governor Sarah Palin. Yeehaw! It's a little bit like what's happening in America at the moment with the Senate, right? Like talking about the messaging again, the left is not doing well in America with how the public is receiving them. They're about to go into a recession. The president over there has not particularly good ratings, cost of living crisis, all these things. And all of that bad news for the current White House and the left was still not enough to drive people to the Republicans in big numbers. Yes, they got Congress, of course, but normally this midterm election is a swing, something like between 25 and 60 seats traditionally, and they just snuck over the line. So there wasn't that big swing. And it's just interesting to think that what can actually drive people to the right. That's how bad they are. So with all the terrible politics on the left don't do politics well at all. As bad as they are, still people are looking at the right in America and going, no, shit, they're worse. It's with their very simple messaging, build that wall, whatever it's going to be. Don't say gay bill, whatever it's going to be. That's the left, isn't it? Anyway, but it's still not enough to drag people over in the kinds of numbers that is traditional for that midterm. Simon says, from my understanding, most Alaskans personally despise Sarah Palin, but a lot of them would still be Republicans. Yeah, and I also think there's probably a little bit of unfairness in my gloating there, because there was another Conservative party member on that bill as well, and they split the right vote. So if it wasn't for either Sarah Palin or the other one, perhaps Republicans would have won it. All right, next quick topic. I feel like I'm doing news headlines. Bam, 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 bam. This is something that the mainstream news media doesn't seem to have picked up on. I actually had someone contact me today and point it out. It's a press release on Scoop, and it's from ACT. ACT is saying no data, no responsibility for truancy. Failures right across the board have contributed to the truancy crisis in New Zealand. It will take a real change and real responsibilities to get kids back in class, says ACT Education spokesperson Chris Bailey. Now, they're following down this path that national, or actually, we're being told, certainly that was the position of Pat Newman the other night, the principal from Te Tai Tokoro Principals Association, is that he believes, one individual, he believes that National is actually following ACT's lead. And this is the thing that I don't think has been talked about anywhere yet. It might have been, but it's quite a big story, because if National are following ACT's lead, and if ACT have the ability and balance of power to put some things in place, little paragraph at the end of this press release, ACT says schools should be receiving funding based on attendance, as it was the case previously for charter schools. This provides a greater incentive for schools to ensure kids are in the classroom than the current enrollment-based funding system. ACT has more solutions for the truancy crisis that we will be announcing soon. Now, remember, they're using the term truancy. We had a look at this last night. 6% is the number of unjustified absences. That's where you'd have to put truancy. Right? For the last 4 years, it's been between 4.5% and 6%. So what the fuck is a truancy crisis when for the last 4 years, it's been anywhere between 4.5% and under 4.5% and 5.5%, and now it's still under 6%. And this thing here, receive funding based on attendance. Does that literally mean if the kid's not at school that day, but they're enrolled in the school, there'd be no funding? Because if a kid's off for a week with, let's say, COVID, they're still at the school. They're just not there. They have a justifiable exemption as to why they're away that day. To be honest with you, I got this note from someone today. Someone messaged me about the bulk funding and about it being based on attendance. And I went looking for it. I Googled it. I couldn't find a report on it anywhere. And I had to go back to them and say, look, I'm sorry, I can't find it. What are you talking about? And they said it's on Scoop. And I went to Scoop and went, you need to be more specific. I can't find it. And they had to actually send me the link to the article, because the article doesn't even talk about, well, it's a ACT press release, doesn't even talk about it. But no other article have I found anywhere talking about ACT's plan for bulk funding based on attendance. I think this is a let's watch this window. Is that what it's called? Let's watch this space. Let's watch this space. Just putting it out there for you. Now, there's also a really horrifically tragic story in the last 24 hours that you all would have heard about. And I'm not sitting here playing any kind of, oh, woe is me card, obviously. But the dairy that this happened at, this horrific stabbing happened at, was 150 meters from the road I used to live in. The dairy that this happened at used to be my local dairy when I lived in Auckland for a period of time. I'm not saying I know the people. I'm not saying I'm impacted by it in any way, shape, or form. But I guess when you're been in a community as a part of that community, which I certainly was, it does make you think twice. Let's have a look at the story on One News about the this devastating stabbing in Auckland. I don't know about you, but don't say that. Someone just said no sound. Oh, you fucking kidding me? You serious? I had this sorted out yesterday, and I checked it today, and it was working, for fuck's sake. Right. I'm going to have to do something. And we'll try again. Oh, I'm sorry. It is a glitch that I can't do it. I was thinking that someone's taking the piss. That'd be really horrible. I've put that idea in your head now, haven't I? Right, we're going to do this again. We're going to click that tab and it will work, but that means the next thing's probably not going to work. So I'm going to have to do this twice. I apologize about that. Right, let's share that screen and go back to it, and we will start the story all over again. Here we go. Give us a thumbs up as soon as you hear it. You guys are about 30 seconds behind me, so I'll wait after I play it, and then we'll be into it. Come on now, play. Just, hang out with yourselves here. Just talk amongst yourselves. That's all right. Just chill for a sec. Speak amongst yourselves. No stresses, no rush.
And the death occurring in the Prime Minister's own neighbourhood has overshadowed Jacinda Ardern's visit to Hamilton ahead of the upcoming by-election there. The Waikato's also been hit by a growing number of ram raids and robberies. Here's senior political reporter Benedict Collins.
A day out campaigning in Hamilton West, eclipsed by the sombre events in Sandringham.
It is devastating to see what has happened, and I've expressed publicly and do so again today. I am so sorry for this family for what has happened.
Acknowledging shopkeepers and stores are being ruthlessly targeted.
We still have grave concerns over repeated aggravated robberies, burglaries, and this is a scenario where we've seen the most horrific of outcomes.
Hamilton has been hit hard by ram raids and robberies itself, and it seems crime is on the minds of all the main candidates and many locals too.
People are terrified in New Zealand now. It's no New Zealand that I grew up in at all.
So here's a question. Are people terrified in New Zealand right now? Now, this is sort of a fine line to walk, yeah? Because this is a horrific tragedy that needs to be addressed in and of itself. There are still issues to talk about with this, though, as well. And one of those issues is, are people still terrified? I'm just going to have a look down again as well, because I've got, I'm assuming Jay's saying no, they're not terrified. Because when you said no, Jay, I'm thinking no sound, because Ben's being a comedian saying no audio, although everyone else is saying audio. Are people actually terrified right now? I remember having this talk when I was working on ZB as a talkback caller. A woman phoned me up late one night and said, used to live in a country where you could go to bed with your windows open wide. And I said to her, what would happen tonight if you went to bed with your windows open wide? And she went, nothing. I went, So what's actually different? Is it that people in New Zealand aren't feeling safe, or is it that there's an appearance of that for various reasons? Like, for example, what's happening in the media. Now, if you are the neighbor of this dairy, I'm sure that's 100% accurate, which is the fine line that's very difficult to try and be empathetic and also sort of have the conversation at the same time. But in general, around the whole of the country, are people in New Zealand really feeling unsafe? Is that an actual truth? If you are, tell me. I'd like to know more about you.
So that you would say that this, the spike in ram raids, it would affect your voting or no?
Absolutely. I'm so not voting for Labour at all.
Do you feel safe?
No, not at all.
The Hamilton West is getting worse now.
just remember as well, that was talking to people in Hamilton. So that lady wasn't a neighbor. So that was just people in general. So as a citizen, she's not feeling safe because of ram raids. Now, entitled to feel however you want. I don't know. Maybe she was a dairy owner. Maybe her parents opened dairy. Maybe they've suffered at the hands of it. I'm not judging her, but I'm just saying that's the step. Because there's ram raids, I don't feel safe in New Zealand. I'm not voting for Labour.
Yeah. There's a lot of breakings and robberies going around.
Nationals candidate urging the government to do more.
The more and more I go around and listen to people, the more and more I see that whānau are feeling very insecure, particularly business owners who've had to cage themselves behind cages to run their businesses.
I just want to acknowledge all of the crime that has occurred and the businesses that have been hit. As a small business owner myself, I understand the impact it can have.
The former Labour MP who sparked the by-election took to Facebook again today.
So if Mr. Sharma wants to play that game, I guess, well, Dr. Sharma, I should be fair and use his correct title. I think what next should happen is journalists who have the ability to do it should be looking up crime in Hamilton West, where he was an MP. So this is the other thing. I was wondering about this, and I've obviously personally don't respect Dr. Sharma one bit from the way he's acted, but I was wondering how many people would use this horrific tragedy to their own end. Maybe the same people who would say things like, after a mass shooting, this is not the time to talk. Yet after the stabbing and there's a narrative of youth crime, this is the time to talk. And I don't think I've seen too much come out about this from the opposition. But of course, Gaurav Sharma needs to get out there because he's fighting for his life, isn't he?
To make his feelings clear, while the ex-party hit the campaign trail too.
Here in Hamilton, the crime is out of control. Today needs to be a turning point where the government starts taking retail crime seriously.
The wave of ram raids and robberies now centre stage in the upcoming by-election. Benedict Collins, One News.
So as is always, I thought it's important for us, and it's important that we actually figure out what is going on. So are we terrified to live in our own country? Are we scared for our own safety? So this is a story from September, and it was from statistics that were released, and they're here from Stats New Zealand in September, right? And they are saying across the board, it's always the situation where you're talking about an individual specific story. It's very difficult to then speak broadly of what's going on. The horrific tragedies and events in Sandringham in the last 24 hours, I think it was last night, wasn't it, make it very difficult and it feels very unempathetic to then talk about crime in general. But with the politicians getting out there and now talking about crime and talking about this being indicative of crime and talking about this as emblematic of a Labour government, then you got to say, well, what is happening with crime? And released in September, newly released in September, crime stats show a record low number of people charged with offences in 21-22 in the financial year. Nationally, 161,000 charges were laid. It's a 21% drop. Adult convictions were down from 53,000 to 42,000. Youth charges were down by 10%. Now, I know what opponents of these numbers are going to say. They're going to say, well, they're the charges. That's because under this Labour government, they're letting everyone go. Well, that's kind of not how it works. I mean, there's been no change in policy from police as to who gets arrested and who doesn't. And there's been no change within policy for the courts as to who was to get charged and who wouldn't. Now, I actually find this response to be fairly encouraging, because the Labour Party could jump up and down about this and go, woohoo, see, look how we're doing. Aren't we awesome? Haven't we got our numbers under control? But Justice Minister Kiri Allan came out saying the numbers don't capture the whole picture. Like, hang on, but the numbers are looking good. And even though they're looking good, the minister still said, cool your jets. She says things like COVID-19 lockdowns have had an effect on lower numbers. She's being a realist in this. She's saying, these numbers might look good, but there are some extenuating circumstances. It's positive that some of the results are down, she says. That said, I want to dig a little deeper to understand where there are lags in court times, whether there are other jams across the justice process to make sure that we and New Zealanders are getting the protections they need at every single letter. Allan admits certain communities around the country don't feel as safe as the stats may perhaps illustrate, like shop owners, straight away looking at it, in Whakatane, who have been impacted by the recent rise in ram raid and smash and grab incidents. These results, yes, they are a net positive and an indication that our policies and parts are working, but I don't take away so much so that we can hang up our aprons and speak and say the job's done. Feels to be quite an appropriate, and I'm not trying to sound dismissive here, but mature response, saying they're good numbers, but we're gonna keep working here. You know, we're not gonna put up the bunting quite yet to celebrate this one. On the other hand, Paul Goldsmith, the National Justice spokesman, said the figures hide the real picture, that violent crime is on the up. So stats numbers tend to say it's trending down, but Paul Goldsmith says no, it's on the up. Everyone's seeing on the ground a big increase in serious crime. That's what's known in the trade as anecdotal evidence. Everyone's seeing on the ground. So that's what people in the streets are saying. And you know what I always say, anecdotal evidence is not necessarily representative of the data. Massive increase in ram raids, an increase in gang membership, and people feeling less safe. Well, the people feeling less safe is not necessarily indicative of more or less crime. It's probably indicative of the culture around it. I think I've told you this before. Michael Moore's documentary Bowling for Columbine, there's a conversation in that around the crime in South Central Los Angeles. The crime in South Central Los Angeles was down, but the coverage of the murder rates were down in South Central Los Angeles, but the murder rates were up by 600. Sorry, crime was down, but the coverage of murders was up by 600%. So whilst it was trending down at this time and crime was coming down and serious crime was coming down and murders were coming down, the coverage of the murders was up by 600%. What did that do? It gave people a feeling of being less safe. He says police are also targeting fewer drivers with drink driving roadblocks, which has also impacted the downward trend. Auckland, New Zealand's largest city, also saw a decrease across the board with a 33% drop in adult convictions and 26% fewer adult offenders given prison sentences. Not the expert here. I'm not saying it's the done deal. It's absolutely done deal, but I will say that Statistics New Zealand, an impartial group, have come out saying that it looks like crime, or certainly the repercussions of crime being convictions, is trending down. Ben says, I've just spent 4 nights wandering around central Christchurch and felt perfectly safe. Jay says, New Zealand, second safest country in the Western world. And Sai says, overall, no, this is, do you feel terrified? But there might be subsets that are concerned. Yeah, fair. Like, for example, I'm sure with a person, with a horrific crime in Sandringham, people in that area might feel particularly concerned tonight. And that's why individual stories don't necessarily represent the overall data. It doesn't take away, and I don't want to sound empathetic of individual stories, whether it's a horrific event like last night and a murder, or whether it's a ram raid, But what I would say, if you want to, it's probably easier talking about a ram raid because it's not so personal. But if you want to have a look at it, how many dairies, let's say there's a ram raid tonight. I believe they're saying that there's one every 15 hours. I'd be surprised if that was an accurate number across the whole year, but that's been reported at some stage. So if there's a ram raid tonight at a dairy, how many dairies will there not be a ram raid at? So the data across the whole country is very different from that one individual dairy owner whose world is upside down, and it's an absolute tragedy. Right, let's get on to the next story. It's one that I've talked about, I've advertised in the chat. It's one about the father of the Colorado Springs gay club shooter, and he has come out sharing some thoughts about his son, and I think without meaning to, has made the situation a heck of a lot worse. Let's have a listen to the story from CBS 8 San Diego.
I love my son no matter what. I love my son.
Until 6 months ago, Aaron Brink thought his son had committed suicide.
I thought he was dead. I mourned his loss.
He says his ex-wife had called him from Colorado in 2016 to tell him their son, Nicholas Brink, had changed his name to Anderson Aldrich and then killed himself.
Do you have any idea why he changed his name?
Yes. His mother told me he changed his name because I was on intervention and I've been a porno actor.
You heard correctly. At the time, Brink was acting in Los Angeles in porno movies. For 6 years, he thought his son was dead until Aldrich called him out of the blue last year and started arguing with him over the phone.
He's pissed off. He's pissed off at me. He wants to poke at the old man.
Fast forward to 2 days ago, Brink got a call from his son's defense attorneys telling him Aldrich was involved in a shooting at an LGBTQ nightclub.
This is where it's a bizarre story already, yeah? Because a former porn star who has also been a meth addict, who has also been on the reality TV show Intervention, whose son doesn't want anything to do with him, whose son's changed his name because his dad was a porn star. And believe it or not, it now gets worse.
In Colorado Springs. Brink says he's a Mormon, and his first reaction was, why was my son at a gay bar?
You know, Mormons don't do gay. We don't do gay. There's no gays in the Mormon church. We don't do gay.
I ran into Brink while
We don't do gay in the Mormon church. Now, this story basically wraps up and finishes off, but we watch it so you don't have to. I've watched the full interview. Oh gosh. Hopefully I can find it. No, this is not it. Let me just mute that because it's unscheduled itself, but okay, I know where the time is. I watched the full conversation with him, not that short.
Was there any history of mental illness with him, or when's the last time you saw him?
When he hears eventually of the crimes that
I thought he committed suicide. His mother.
Was there any history of mental illness with him?
Not gay. This is now giving me trouble to play this thing out. I'm just having, let's see if it'll do it for you. So they didn't mention that in the report.
Was there any history of mental illness with him, or when's the last time you saw him?
My son, I hadn't seen him for years. I thought he committed suicide. His mother told me that he. I'll give you a history. I was a porn star. Okay, I became a porno star in 2002, and I combined it with a mixed martial arts career. And my ex was that she took off my son. I hadn't seen him for years. Little did I get to see my son. You know, I tried to give him, you know, the same way I had my son. I never see my kids. I never, you know, but I want to be in his life. You know? So
he doesn't know what his kid's done yet.
He's been
They
accused
tell
of
him.
doing some crazy thing. I don't know what he's been accused of. I can't get answers from the attorneys really, but they're saying that somebody's, you know, it's involved in a gay bar or some shit. I don't know. I don't know what the heck he did at a gay bar.
I don't know what the heck he's
He's
doing at a
accused
gay
of
bar.
going on a mass shooting at a gay bar and killing 5 people.
Colorado.
Okay, well, that's shit. If he's accused of doing that, I'm surprised he's not gay. You know, I say that, but he's not gay.
And if you missed that, it's I'm glad he's not gay. So this father just got told that his son might have just shot and killed 5 people, and his response is, I'm glad he's not gay. Yep, Si, you're correct. This guy is a space cadet, and JC's meth is one hell of a drug. All right, guys, we're going to wrap up now with some, is it going to wrap up? I think it is actually. So I had a guest on the podcast this morning, which is going to be released tomorrow morning. His name is David Fenton. A really interesting conversation with him. He is a progressive left-wing activist, and his where he is at the moment, he's got to a place in his career. He's been doing it for 50 years, where he uses communication for his activism. Now, he's done all the other stuff, like he's been on the bridges and he's taken photographs and he's been involved with writing, all that. So he's done it all. And where he's come to through starting up a progressive PR company is actually using communication for his activism. And I thought what we'd do tonight is just play you a couple of clips. The clips in and of themselves are I think interesting, but also it means that if I can show you a little bit about what's coming out tomorrow, and if you want to watch it, you can watch it. It will be up to you. So the first clip we're going to watch tonight is a conversation, part of the conversation where David and I are talking just purely about how the left and the right communicate differently. So when you describe the left as using the Tower of Babel, I'm like, you know, lots of messages, no one understanding each other, talking over each other, not a cohesive group. And for a very long time, I've been saying the right, quote unquote, right, seems to do politics better. And the reason for that is they do get behind one message. even if they hate someone who talks about grabbing pussies, once he's the president, they get in lockstep and he is their leader no matter what. Whereas the left, if they don't like your message, even if you're in the same team, they kick you out of the boat. That's what I've experienced.
Yeah, well, that's the historical pattern of the left, unfortunately, in many, not all cases. You know, this we don't value communications with the public very much on the left. We used to, when I first got involved in progressive action in the late 1960s, mass persuasion and mass communications was the name of the game. And we paid a lot of attention to that. And we also had music and mass culture on our side in the progressive landscape in the late 60s and early 70s. And now the right pays much attention to this than we do. You know, why it is has been explained to me by the great linguist Dr. George Lakoff, who recently retired from UC Berkeley. And here's how he puts it. He says that people in the progressive world generally study the humanities, the law, and the sciences. And they are taught an intrinsic worldview that is, he calls the Enlightenment fallacy, that a great idea will magically persuade on its own because of its inherent brilliance. And people on the right go to business school by and large, where they study marketing and cognitive science, and they have to learn how to sell products and services in order to get ahead in their careers. We don't.
Yeah.
And so they learn that simple messages that everyone can understand easily, repeated all the time, is the way the brain changes and public opinion changes. So that's how they function. You know, here in the US, the right has a meeting basically every morning to say, you know, what's our message today? And they pretty much all unify and say the same things. And as you said, we have the Tower of Babel. We don't value unifying communications. We really don't value communications in general. And when we do communicate, it tends to be way too complex. You know, in a funny way, you know, we don't like what the science, the cognitive science, proves is what works to change people's minds.
Yeah.
And what works is simple. We hate simplifying. And, you know, in the humanities and the sciences, we're rewarded for complexity, not simplicity. And we hate repeating ourselves. And, you know, this is a problem with the news media, too, because if it isn't news, they don't report it again, yet people don't learn when they only hear a thing once. So
yeah,
we need to use the principles and science of modern communications if we want to prevail. Otherwise, the other guys will.
Yeah, and I mean, like the perfect example, although it's not a New Zealand example, is build that wall or make America great again, again and again and again.
Or
and
stop
again
the
and
steal.
Again. Yeah, and now make America great again has now been turned into a descriptor that everyone uses, including the mainstream media, to describe a group of people. So not only has it been
right.
not only has it been used, you know, by Donald Trump to do that repetitive thing as a simple message, it's now become a part of our parlance, our colloquial way of describing a group of people, and everybody uses it. So it's certainly done its job. And I was thinking, we've got an election next year here in New Zealand, and I was thinking, and listening to you through the last month or so and reading some of your stuff, it made me kind of think, oh shit, even I've fallen into this trap, because our right-wing party in New Zealand, the National Party, is nothing like Trumpian, you know, America at the moment. But the conservatives sitting on the right party, right?
Sure.
They do it. They have the same lines they repeat again and again and again. And for the past few months, I've been joking about I'm looking forward to the election next year, because what we're going to do is we're going to watch the debates live, and we're going to have a bingo card. And every time they say those lines we're hearing them say all over again, we're going to tick it off and, you know, have a shot. But as I was thinking, hang on, but that means that they've done the job you're talking about, because if they're repeating those lines enough for me to put them on a bingo card, then that's exactly what you're describing. So I've kind of fallen into the trap of being affected by it without even realizing.
It does work on the subconscious. You know, as people are exposed to language, we form circuits in our brain. The linguists call them frames. They're actual circuits from repetitive exposure to language.
Right.
And successful communications tends to instantly activate one of those existing mental circuits or frames. For example, in the climate world, which is what I focus on now, if you say net zero, most people don't know what you mean. You're not activating an existing mental circuitry. If you say we have to stop pollution, everybody knows what you mean instantly, and no one likes pollution. So we have to learn to work within these simple concepts that activate the brain so that people can understand what we're talking about.
Yep, there you go. So there's the first clip for you, and we will bring up a couple more for you as well. And that's what we were saying earlier about the idea that you need to, the simple messages are the messages that work. Yeah, it was a fascinating chat. As I said, tomorrow morning, the rest of it will be available for you online. Let's have a look at the second little clip we're going to play for you. And it is speaking about identitarian politics. And we talked a bit about this tonight already. And the question was around identitarian politics. And the theme of this short clip, it's only 3 minutes long, is why gender issues are a losing message for the left in general.
The left has moved into a certain kind of sectarianism.
Yeah.
And, sectarianism in the dictionary is putting the interests and needs of your subgroup ahead of the interests of the whole. It's a kind of self-divisiveness. And so we have this so-called woke language happening here that is based on a kind of sectarianism we call identarianism. And again, identity is very important, and people have the right to whatever identity they want. But that doesn't mean that focusing on the language of your identity is smart politics or is going to amass mass support and majority support. And the only way, of course, that you can change things, the only way that you can help the oppressed and the vulnerable is to get power through assembling majority support. So when people on the left now use terms like cis-normative and intersectional, I can tell you that nobody knows what the hell they mean. So if they want to use terms like that within a subgroup, that's fine. But for your political communication, that's dead on arrival.
So they're trying to, it's the classic example I see in America is Latinx. Like there are some groups trying to further this, non-binary language Latinx, but the Latino community has gone, fuck off, we're not using that.
Well,
because their whole
they talk.
Yeah, exactly. Because their whole, the A or the O at the end is actually they have gendered language.
That's right.
But there is a subgroup saying that this is how everyone should talk, and the group that it actually impacts most of all have said, yeah, we're not doing that. We're not playing that game. And it was one of the questions I had written down here for you is, like, you've said three things I want to go back to already, but why is this the new thing, all consuming for so many progressives?
Well, look, gender is a very important thing, and people have the right to be whatever gender they want to be. It's a very sacred and important right. I mean, anything else is oppression. I'm just saying that if you make that your main political message, you're not going to win power. In the 60s, we achieved a lot of lasting impact. And a lot of it was around issues of personal freedom and, greatly reducing, although certainly there's much more work to be done. There's less sexism, there's less racism. We had a Black president, women are in the workforce. None of that used to be true, in the early 60s. So, marijuana is getting legalized. Personal freedom and the freedom to be who yourself is much greater. It's not perfect by any means, long way to go. But what we didn't succeed at is getting power. We didn't build institutions. The corporate world is more dominant in my country than ever before. They run everything. And so my point is, if we're going to make our main message gender and identity, we're not going to get power. And if we don't get power, we can't help protect people that are transvestites or any kind of personal identity. So we have to distinguish between our own feelings and what is tactically and politically smart to achieve our goals.
So there you go. And quite quickly after I put that out as a clip today, and I'll show you what it is, I got some pushback on the messaging. So I put this clip up today, and there it is there. So there's the clip that went up today. David Fenton on why gender issues are a losing message for the left. And quite quickly I got pushback. If you have a rightist message, the need to hold power, not make things fair or better, your analysis is rightist. If you think being the most powerful is what matters, not what can be improved, but as an end, you have no message for the left. If you want to hold power, even when the price is fairness for all, you are offering the left a route to the right. Lefties, this is wrong. Don't sacrifice people for power. Now, I think probably one of the things here that we find is that David is a specialist in PR and communications, and his job on some level is to get people elected. His job on some level is to advise on how groups and people get their message out there. So actually what he's calling getting power, and I feel like, you know, there's a group of people who are like, oh, the man, reject power. We're not about power. We're not, but the reality is if you're not sitting in the seat or sitting at the table, you don't get to make the policies to impact the group you're trying to help. And so the position I think that David was taking, and I think he does take all the way through, is that if you don't put the right message forward to be in a position to be at the table, i.e. have the power, then you're never going to affect a change. And I think we've seen this all before, right? We've seen this all before, and a lot of us have experienced this before, where one side of the conversation is just about the right of group X, Y, or Z. Great, support it. But if it's just about the right of X, Y, or Z at all other costs, and it's not a message that's going to put the group trying to sell that message to X, Y, or Z into the seat that can make the change, then it's kind of... It's a tough one, because I'm not saying we got to compromise, because I know people are going to rally against that as well. But the reality is you're not going to get to effect a legislative change unless you are in power, unless you have the government, unless you are the government in this instance that we're talking about. So if you're rejecting or pushing back against the word power, so be it. If you think that people are saying that the fight for power, actually, I didn't play it in that clip, but on the full episode I was saying, so are you saying any means to an end when it comes to getting into power, because then you can affect a change? And he said, no, of course not. Of course it's not any means to an end. That didn't come up in the clip. That comes up in the full conversation. But the point being, unless you actually at the table, you're not going to make the legislation. So how hard do you push on the messaging that's unpopular yet is your true belief and ideology that's not going to get you to the seat? How much do you got to be more careful or more clever with your messaging to be able to be in the seat of power, where you can then affect the change for the people you're trying to affect it for? That's the rub at the moment. You know, whatever your issue is, if that's your sole issue, but it's not popular enough to get you elected on, i.e. your main positioning, then you're never going to be at the seat to make an effect, the change for the thing that you're passionate about. You got to get in as well. Unless you want to work in an NGO or you want to work on the outside throwing stones, and that can make a change, but we're specifically talking about legislation, right? And the only way you make legislative change, well, not the only way, but certainly the by far and away the majority of the way, is to be in power, in government, however you want to word it. Last little clip before we head off, and this is a conversation, just 2.5 minutes long, I think, this clip, on the difference between the left and the right approaching free speech. And this is what we had to say about that. It's so much not a left versus right conversation, because the political compass talks about authoritarian and libertarian as well. And I feel that on the left, which for a long time, if you think about the hippies in the 60s and stuff, was the bastion of free speech and free expression and all that. But if you go to the left and go up onto the authoritarian side, that seems to be one of the areas at the moment that is people who want to most hinder free speech out of everybody, in my experience at least. And it seems that the closer you get to libertarianism on the left or the right, the more you seem to be for free speech. But it feels to me that those on the right, so forget the authoritarian left, but those are more on the libertarian left, they're looking for these freedoms around speech, in my opinion, to be able to have authentic, genuine, real conversations and not be scared about, what they're saying in case they step on some toes of the sensitive.
Right. Get
Whereas
canceled.
whereas those on the right seem to want to have free speech so they can use the N word and the F word and go, well, they're just words. No one matters. That's how it kind of feels to me. Can you speak to that?
No, I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's intimidation going on the left. People are afraid to speak out against all this craziness that is going on. There's so much intolerance. It's really antithetical to the spirit of creativity and personal freedom of the 60s. It's a kind of McCarthyism, if you know what I'm referring to, that Senator McCarthy going after people for their thoughts and their beliefs. It's very intolerant, and it helps the right when the left is seen as intolerant in that way. So it's a big problem, and people within a lot of the progressive organizations who know better are afraid to speak out because they do get canceled and their careers do get ruined and mobs do come after them online. So it's not a good period for that. That's certainly true. On the right, I don't think that there's an intentional desire to hurt people, but people on the right in America, they really don't like the idea of, for example, kids being taught the history of racism in America. They want it to be all rah, America is only great. Well, America isn't only great and hasn't only been great, although it has many great aspects. So, they feel threatened by that. And that, of course, is tied into the fact that demographically, white European people in the United States are going to become the minority, and they're pretty freaked out about that. But people better get used to it. It's what's happening.
So there you go. David Fenton on how the left and the right approach free speech. Free Soul says very interesting, and also says the left need smarter messaging. Yeah, I agree with Free Soul. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you want to check out that podcast, that is going to be uploaded to the YouTube channel that you are probably watching us on. If you're watching us on Facebook, DOC NZ has its own Facebook page. If I was a professional broadcaster, I would have had it already up by now. Hang on. DOC NZ. So tomorrow morning, I think at 8 o'clock. There it is. It's going to be up on there it is there, episode 238. It's going to be up tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. It's going to be on the YouTube channel as well. And it's going to be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts at 6 a.m. So if you're driving to work tomorrow and you want to check it out and you want to find out what it's all about and what's been said, full podcast up tomorrow morning. But just fascinating. His book's called The Activist Media Handbook, Lessons from 50 Years as a Progressive Agitator. I do think as well, and I'm not suggesting anyone out there tonight is going to have any problems with anything he's had to say, but if you do, I will also remind you of that saying, if I've seen further, it's that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. If you are someone who sits in the realm of progressive politically right now, if you're someone who likes to fight the progressive fight, this guy is one of the giants with whose shoulders you are standing on, without question. Been doing it for 50 years. So, all right, that's us. We will be back again tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. And until then, be safe, be well. And I will catch you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. Tomorrow morning, check out the podcast. Tomorrow night, we'll see you back here live for another live stream of the big news of the day.